Music in the 1940s. Swing, jazz, Latin, and country dominated the music industry in the 1940s. Unsurprisingly, many popular songs in the first half of the decade were connected with World War II. Songs to do with home and hope were released to keep the soldiers' spirits high while they were out fighting in Europe. One of the most famous wartime songs, released in 1941, is The White Cliffs of Dover by Vera Lynn. Another famous artist of the decade was Bing Crosby, who had many hits including Don't Fence Me In and White Christmas. He often collaborated with other artists such as the Andrews Sisters. Some of the most famous jazz musicians of the decade were Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, and the Ink Spots. Ella Fitzgerald and the Ink Spots collaborated on many songs including Into Each Life, Some Rain Must Fall.
In the 50s and 60s, it was mainly rock and roll, country, jazz and rhythm and blues that populated the music industry. Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly were some of the most notorious artists. In the 60s, the evolution of rock, funk and soul hit. Artists from the era included the Beatles, Beach Boys, Jimi Hendrix. The Beatles had 15 different albums which all topped charts in the UK. The Beach Boys produced Pet Sounds, which was their most notorious album.
Music in the 1970s. In North America, Europe and Oceania, the decade saw the rise of disco, which became one of the biggest genres of the decade, especially in the mid to late 1970s. Aside from disco, funk, smooth jazz, jazz fusion and soul music remained popular throughout the decade. Some of the most famous artists of the 1970s were Pink Floyd, Fleetwood Mac, the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin. Pink Floyd released the album Dark Side of the Moon in March 1973, and this was one of their most famous albums. Fleetwood Mac released Rumours in 1977. The Rolling Stones released the album Sticky Fingers in 1971. And Led Zeppelin released two singles which became very popular, Stairway to Heaven in 1971 and Immigrant Song in 1970.
80s music. This decade saw the dance music come into full force as disco fell out of fashion in the early years of the decade. Genres such as rock, Italio disco, Euro disco, and dance pop became more popular. A wide range of people continued to enjoy rock music. The main type was rock and roll. Bands such as Bon Jovi, Guns N' Roses, The Police and Queen were all included. Other noticeable mentions include The Cure, The Smiths. 90s music, there was a new wave which included more house music such as Crystal Waters with her hit single Gypsy Woman. Nirvana released their song Smells Like Teen Spirits, which became their most famous track. The Spice Girls released Wannabe and Coolio Gangsta's Paradise.
And for music in the 2000s, the most popular genres were rock, pop, metal and hip hop. There was a birth of the new indie rock style, and some of the most famous artists of the decade were Beyoncé, Eminem, Jay-Z and Kanye West. The 2000s music was also greatly affected by the internet, with the ongoing development of user-friendly media players such as iTunes, YouTube and Napster. Napster was one of the biggest sharing programs for music as it was the first free internet. Oh, why can't I say this sentence? Oh, okay.
I'm just going to look away.
Okay. Napster was one of the biggest sharing programs for music as it was the first free internet song sharing music service. Soon after its creation in 2001, the project was sued and shut down, but eventually opened again in 2002.
A huge thank you to Emily and Ella there for their assembly on music over the past few decades, and thank you to the rest of the Prefect team that put together the presentation and sent it through. We really look forward to seeing what other Prefect teams are able to do, and it required just a small amount of editing from me. Huge thank you Year 12, have a fantastic week, a fantastic Easter, and I look forward to seeing you on your return.